going to try our first series of color experiments to get to know our materials. For today, you will want your brushes. You want a rag of some kind. You want your spray bottle, and I have filled it maybe 3/4 of the way with water. And what I'm going to do is I have to remove the little safety seal from my slow dry medium, and I am just going to add a little gloop of it. I don't need to add a lot. I'm going to save this for later. So I've added a tiny gloop of slow dry medium. Shake that up, and you can see that it makes a very fine mist, and I'll be able to mist this on my paper, and I'll be able to mist my palette, the paint on my palette, and when I paint on a canvas, I'll be able to mist that on a canvas to keep it open longer. I am not a fan of the natural hog bristle for acrylic because it has a tendency to get waterlogged. I know it lists water media as something that you can use. It is a really good brush for oils, but it has a tendency to get waterlogged. Nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and pick this one to work with today. And I'm going to go ahead and pick another one of my bristle brushes, or of my nylon brushes, a white one, to work with today. So I've recommended, it's not in your kit, that you get yourself any kind of a sketchbook. If you don't have a sketchbook, I bet somewhere at home you've got an old notebook with notes in it that hasn't been finished everywhere, and it's perfectly all right. And in fact, in the spirit of equity, I'm going to go ahead and use this because not everybody is going to have a sketchbook ready at home, and it doesn't come in our kit. So I'm going to go ahead and use this guy for my experiments today, and you can do as well in yours. Something else I'm going to use, of course, is my palette, which does come in the kit. And so to begin with, what I want you to do is to put a little bloob of yellow on your palette, a little bloob of primary red. Next to that primary red, go ahead and put a bloob of the crimson and the phthalo. Small amounts, we don't need a lot because we're just going to be doing color mixes today. Learn how our colors interact. And maybe above it, let's put a little bit of white. And now before I even begin mixing anything, I'm going to go ahead and give this a nice spritz. All right, I'm going to set this on my side. I'm going to put these paints behind me, and you might notice that underneath everything I've got this dirty paper to protect my tabletop surface, and I recommend you do the same thing. You're not going to make friends with your family, your landlord, or your roommates if you get paint all over everything. I'll tell you that much. This I know from experience, having been an artist for a long time. So the very first thing we want to explore, and you're probably familiar with the color wheel, but you're not familiar with these particular pigments because you just bought them. This is the first time you have them. And primary red in this brand is going to be different than primary red in basics, for example. In the basics, the primary red is a true red. It's a cadmium hue, it's orangey, and this one is more of a cold red, closer to that crimson than I would like. But let's see what we can do. So just draw a circle. My circle is not going to be perfect, you see. Yours doesn't have to be perfect either. And inside that circle, I'm going to draw a triangle. And again, that doesn't have to be equilateral. It's not a geometry class, just any kind of triangle. And before I ever put my brush to paint, I always hit it with the solvent first, and then I can wipe it with, and the reason why you want to wet your brush with solvent always. In this case, we're working with acrylic. Our solvent is water. If I'm working with oils, my solvent might be citrus cleaner, or it might be oil, or it might be Gamsol. So whenever I work with a brush, I need to wet it first. And the reason for that is just like when you wash your hair, you gotta wet it first. It lubricates the bristle. It lubricates that fiber, whether it's a nylon or a natural hair fiber, it needs to get wet. And one of the reasons we want it to get wet, this little pinched metal part, that's called a ferrule. Let me spell that out for you. F-E-R-R-U-L-E. And that ferrule squeezes the hairs and holds them to that brush. Now what happens? Over time, as you paint, the capillary action of whether it's a natural fiber or a nylon fiber, it has a capillary action and the paint migrates inside of the ferrule. So if you don't take care of your brushes and always wet them before you start and always clean them when you're done, this part holds on to paint and it starts to get really stiff. And so what happens is you lose, this is called spring. See how my brush goes back to its initial shape? Even though I've pressed on it, that's spring. And so over time you lose the spring and the brush starts to break off. You get like split ends. So always wet that brush, but you don't want to leave your brushes with paint out either because the paint does dry. So you have to just kind of create a rhythm of dipping, wiping. This is why it's so good to have a rag with you when you are painting at all times. Don't just wait. And sometimes my rag can be a paper towel too. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take a little bit of my yellow and I'm just gonna put some here. And you can see right away that this yellow is very light. I wipe my brush in the water and then again on my rag and I'm back to square one. Now I'm going to take my primary red and over here I'm going to put primary red and I'm only going to put it in half. And you can see just how pink this primary red really is. This is a very cold red. And now I'm going to take my crimson and put that next to it. And now I find that my crimson is darker. And now I'm going to grab my blue and I'm going to put it in this corner. And I find that this blue is a green hue blue. We actually have enough colors here with these three primaries to create variety. So now let's see what happens. If I take a little bit of the blue and I take a little bit of the red, we'll now have this darker red, my crimson red, and I am creating a violet here. And that does give me a very pretty violet actually. I want you to notice that this violet almost looks black. It's very dark. Let's see what it actually looks like by taking a little bit of white. Now that I've gotten two oranges, it's time to get my greens. I'm going to take some yellow and some of this blue, and I am going to get this very brilliant green. Violet or purple to get a lighter color, and of course I could add white to any of these colors to make tints. White plus chroma, that's a fancy name for color, equals tint. So now let's go ahead and try that out. I'm going to go ahead and grab my primary red right here. And smooth it down like a stripe. And now I'm going to grab my white and come from the other direction. And I'm going to blend my colors. To get a value scale. Now, if I want to make a shade, black plus chroma equals shade. I need to add black, but my palette doesn't come with black. What am I going to do? All right, I'm going to grab my dark red, I'm going to add my blue and a little bit of the yellow. And if I mix these together, I will create what is known as chromatic black. And a chromatic black is the addition of all of my colors. It's a pretty close approximation to a black. And so now I'm going to go, see, that kind of looks like black? And I'm going to take it down. And now I'm going to grab that red and blend it up. And now I've created tints of my primary red, and I have created shades of my primary red. And so we want to do that with our primary colors and our secondary colors. Mainly, I want you to experience one thing. When you add black to yellow, it turns green. It does not turn dark yellow. So when you want to make a dark yellow, you have to mix a little bit of orange into it. And I want you to notice now I have kind of like a darker yellow. I can add a little bit of that black to it. Maybe that's too much. Let's grab some of that orange. And I start to get a kind of ochre, which is a kind of dark yellow. So that's the only way I'm going to be able to get a darker yellow. Let's find out something else that happens. If I want to make a brown, I'm going to take my orange. It can be either one of my oranges. And if I add black to my orange, I will be creating brown. Do you see how that turns brown? So if I take black and I add orange to it, I've made brown. So knowing how your colors behave when you add white to them and when you add black to them, knowing how to mix, create your own black or chromatic black is actually very important. So even if you know your color wheel, you still want to know how this particular set of paints works. So what I want you to do is on another sheet of paper, take your yellow, take one of your reds, and take your blue, and do a white to black value scale of each of your primaries. A contrast of hue, each of these colors is a different hue, a different chroma, is the first contrast of color. The second contrast is a contrast of value, which means that colors in a painting can either be light tints, middle tones, or dark shades. And monochromatic color means that you get to do a painting in tints and tones and shades of your favorite or a color. I'm going to pick for this piece, I'm just going to draw any random shape in here, just an abstract shape. I don't need it to look like anything. And I just drew a random jaggedy shape. And now I'm going to pick my favorite color here of my, and it's starting to dry. So I'm going to go ahead and spray my color again. I'm going to take some of my phthalo blue, and I'm going to take some of my primary red, not too much, to create a colder blue. I like a periwinkle blue, that's kind of my favorite color. And I'm going to go ahead and fill a big area with it. Now I'm working with one of the bristle brushes because it's a fairly large shape here. And if it's a large shape, I'm going to use a larger brush. And now I want to make that color a little darker. So I'm going to add my black to it. Let it just kind of blend a little bit there, and then I think I'm going to add that darker color right in here. I'm going to take my blue again, take some of my red, and this time I'm going to add a tiny bit of white, not too much, just a tiny bit. Now I'm going to add even more white to that color. Go here. And now I want to have a really light blue. That wasn't light enough here. Even lighter. Maybe here it can go even lighter. Give me a little bit more variety. And I have just made an abstract using blue plus white plus black. So this is monochromatic. Make sure that you write that with your color experiment. I really should finish my color wheel. So we have yellow, we have green. What happens if I add yellow to my green? I get yellow-green. Or blue to green. When I add blue to green, I get a blue-green. If I add yellow to my orange, I get yellow-orange. So if I add blue to my violet, get blue violet. The color wheel is cold colors, and the other side has warmer colors. So yellow with blue gives you green. So that's a primary color. Green is a secondary color. This color in between, the yellow green and the blue green, are what we call tertiary. Yellow orange, red violet, blue violet, these are tertiaries. When you have 3 or more colors next to each other on the color wheel, so these colors right here, and these colors right here, are what we call analogous colors. They're right next to each other on the color wheel, and that means that they share a chroma. So now remember, we did an experiment with our favorite color plus black and white to create a monochromatic color scheme. And now we're going to do a similar one with analogous colors. So now I'm going to still stay with that blue because I love that blue, and now I put a whole bunch of it. So I've got my blue, and what are the colors next to my blue? Well, I can have blue-green. I can add whites to these colors. I mean, look at how much I'm already creating right here on my palette. On the other side of my blue and the green, I have yellow greens. So I have all of these colors plus black plus white that I can now use here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this green here. Small shape, so I switch to my smaller brush. Into this green I'm going to add quite a bit of white. And I'm going to let that start to blend out into my proper green. And have that blend out into a blue-green. And then have my blue-green blend out. And what happens if I add black to that now? Look at that. Blue-green has now become really deep and dark. And now I'm going to add white to that. Right here. Right here. And so hopefully what you're starting to see is that even though I'm still working with this chroma with my blue, by working with colors analogous to my blue plus black and white, I can really create a much more colorful and complicated painting than if I just work monochromatically. That's just a lot more interesting in my mind than what I initially started out with. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of light here. This seemed to have gotten a little dark for my taste. There. Maybe this one. Pure white right here in this edge. And I think I want some pure black somewhere. Blue, red, and yellow give me black. So my 3 primaries together. And I think I'll just do the pure black right in this corner right here. have that blend out. Maybe pure black and come right in this line right here. All right, so let's compare. Here's my monochromatic. One color plus blue and black actually gave me a really pleasant color scheme. But now that I've come to the colors adjacent to my blue, so there's my blue and I added some violet and I added some green to it. I even went as far as yellow greens and I added white and I added black to it. I got a much more complex color scheme, and it's still just a random jaggedy abstract here. So analogous equals at least 3 colors adjacent or next to each other on the wheel, plus black, plus white, and any mixture in between to create an interesting color scheme. So let's go back to our color wheel for a moment. We have learned a contrast of hue is the first contrast. That is that a painting and the color wheel have different colors. We have learned that by adding white you create a tint, by adding black you create a shade. And that brings us to the second contrast of color, which is that colors have values. When I look at my color wheel, I see that those colors at the top of my color wheel are lighter in value, and then as they get to the bottom of the color wheel, they're also darker. So not only can I add tints and shades of a color, colors themselves have different weight. Some colors are light, like yellow, and some colors are dark, like violet. There's another quality to color that we haven't discussed. That's temperature. All the colors on one side of the color wheel are cold. These are colors associated, for example, with grass, with water, with foliage. To neutralize a color, you need to know its complements. The complement of yellow, which is one of our primaries, is the addition of the other 2 primaries. So yellow is opposite of violet. Red and blue together give us violet. The opposite of blue, right here, here's my blue. The opposite of blue is orange, and orange is created when you mix yellow and red together. You get an orange. And the opposite of my red, here's my red. The opposite of red is green, which comes when you mix yellow with blue. So there are 2 ways in which you can decrease the intensity of a color and neutralize it or make it duller. You can either add some of the complement or you can add a gray. And let's see how that works. I've been working with blue all this time. So here's my blue. And the complement of my blue is orange. So I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow. Come on, yellow. Here's yellow. And here's red and here's orange. So here's my orange. If I add white to this so you can see, sometimes to see intensity you may need to add white. There's my white to my blue. You can see how intense that blue is. Let's see if I add some white to my grayed down blue, what it acts like. Look at that. It's actually a little, maybe a little too yellow. There we go. Do you see how this is a much grayer color? Now, another way to gray down my blue, here's my black. Here's my black, as close to black as I can get without buying one, mixing one. And now if I add some white to that, I think it needs a little bit of yellow in there. It needs some red in there. There's a gray. You see how that's a grayish color? And now I can add my blue to that. And that grays down my color. Now, if I add some white to this, look at that. You can see that my color next to my blue has become much grayer. So I have gone from an intense blue to a grayed down blue, either by adding orange to it or by adding my black and white to it, my gray. So what I would like for you to do is to take one of these colors and move it like I did from the pure hue, from a pure blue, all the way to a neutral. And the way that you're going to do that is by adding the complement to it and the black to it. Now we're kind of cheating because the black you can see is much darker than my blue, so I may need to add a little bit of white. Got to clean my brush really well, because if not, I'm adding my mixes to my perfectly clean blue. And I can see my color has in fact become a neutral gray. So you want to create an intensity scale of 1 or 2 colors. So now let's do something interesting so you can get a little bit more information about how the differences between how the same color acts in next to a monochromatic, next to a complement, next to an analogous color. Let's do something fun. Let's switch from blue. I'm kind of done with blue. Oh my God, blue is taking over my world. Let's hit up the oranges. I'm like, let's do orange. I'm hungry, I want an orange. I could use a cutie right about now. Nice mandarin. All right, so what I want you to do So I'm going to grab some of my yellow here, and I'm going to grab a big glob of my red here, and I find this orange is maybe a little dark. I'm going to add a tiny bit of white to it, and I've mixed enough so I can go ahead and put this color inside each of these circles. You want to make sure you cover that circle, and we're not going to leave any white around it when we go with the surrounding color. Remember, I just mixed a big batch of that orange, and it's the same orange across all 4 circles. And this is where you're really going to get a kick out of color theory. It's so amazing how the same color will act differently depending on what it's around. And you know, colors are like human beings in this way. So first, let's see what happens when we take this orange and we put it next to an analogous color. So we know that red is analogous to orange. So I'm going to go ahead and surround it with, because see, white is a color, so if I leave a little speck of white around it, it's not a real comparison of how that orange behaves. Look at that, it's chilling out. You can barely see the differences between one and the other. So next, let's try it with our complement. So the complement of orange, which is yellow and blue, yellow and red is blue. And now you're gonna be like, what? That is not the same orange. You saw me paint it. You're doing the same thing on your, don't just watch this, do it. You need to do it yourself. Mix these colors, experience the magic of color theory yourself. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? It doesn't even look like it's the same color. This never, ever ceases to amaze me and interest me. So this is Analogous. This is complementary. This is what we call simultaneous contrast. We're going to mix a gray. Now remember, to mix a black, so let's put that orange here. All right. This is simultaneous contrast. And I'll explain what that term means. And then these two are going to be a contrast of extension. Now I've already mixed my black. That's how I got my gray. I'm going to grab my black. Too much water on my brush. Now remember, this is a chromatic black. It's never inert or completely neutral the way an ivory or Mars black, which is a pigment, is, but that's as black as you can be for sure. Let's cover this with white and see how our orange behaves. You can really start to see that this paper that you thought was white when I started my demo is actually a very light gray, because when I paint white on it, boy, what a difference that makes. Remember, this is exactly the same orange, and you can see that it looks like it's a completely different pigment. When you've done it yourself, it's harder to see on a camera with this kind of an even light than it is. One thing that you can see is that it looks like my color even got darker in some places and lighter in others, and it's the same exact blue. How is my orange behaving in the analogous condition? Well, this is acting like orange is hanging out with its BFF, and they're both like wearing their lounge wear and they're eating pizza. This is my analogous color scheme. It is so chill. They're hanging out together. They're sinking. Orange is sinking into that red, disappearing very comfortably into that red. So what does this tell you? It tells you that if you want to create a painting where there's a lot of unity, where things are sticking together, you can use analogous colors. The same orange looks completely different here when it is next to a complement. In this case, blue. Here, it looks like it's had a cocktail and it's at a party and it is woohoo, having a good time. This orange is floating above the blue and wants to expand. It is acting like the tipsy drunk at a party. Honestly, complementary colors when placed next to each other, each enhance the other, make it more vibrant, make it more active. So this tells you, if you want to create a painting full of excitement, full of movement, bring in some complements. Sometimes though, that's too obvious. So what can you do? You can bring in a gray. This is called simultaneous contrast. So what happens is that the eye hungers for complements. And actually this gray turned out to be a tiny bit, when it dried, turned out to be a tiny bit dark. So I'm going to lighten it a little bit so that it's closer in value. I want to make it closer in value to the blue. Maybe I went too light now. Is that too light? I think that's closer to the value of my blue. Yeah, because it dried really dark, and then that's not a fair comparison. Yeah, that's closer in value to the blue. And what you can see then is that the orange is behaving almost as if it's with the blue. It's not sinking in like it is with the Analogous. It is still popping up. And my gray starts to warm up, even though it's an actual gray. Next to the black, my color, like with the blue, expands. It becomes lighter in weight. It is floating and expanding. Compare it next to the white, where now the orange is sinking in, not as much as it did with Analogous, but it is definitely sinking in and staying put. Extension refers to the fact that each color has a weight. Each color has a tendency to either contract or to expand. And so one thing that you will find in your color palette is that yellow is actually a kind of difficult color to use. Yellow has a tendency to really expand, to really move forward. So when we're little kids and we do a painting and we put a sun in the corner, that sun, if we paint it in, has a tendency to really draw all the attention up to that corner. And theorists believe that the reason we see yellow as such an aggressive, such a loud, vibrant color, the lightest color, the most vibrant color, is because we have a yellow sun. And we, as mammals, require sunlight to grow and to live. And so because of our necessity for that color yellow, we see yellow as a bigger, more expansive color than it really is. And by the same token, blue, even the brightest blue, will be, you can have a lot of blue in a painting and it'll have a tendency to stay where you put it instead of expand beyond the borders, the way yellow has a tendency to expand beyond the borders, because we live on a blue planet. We have blue skies with blue waters, and if we perceive the color blue as aggressive, we would always feel oppressed, as if the sky was falling on us or as if a tsunami was going to wash us away. So part of the reason we perceive the emotional textures of color the way we do is because of the structure of our eyes, but also our own psychological needs as biological organisms.